In the harsh wilderness of Wyoming Territory, Sarah Henderson's world crumbled the day her horse spooked at a rattler. Once a capable rancher, she now drags herself around her isolated cabin, watching supplies dwindle as winter's icy fingers creep closer. With no family left and her nearest neighbor miles away, each sunset brings her closer to a lonely death. Then one crisp dawn, wealthy rancher James Blackwood spots an unexpected wisp of smoke rising above the trees. What he discovers in that humble cabin will challenge everything he thought he knew about strength and survival. Through frostbitten mornings and candlelit evenings, their unlikely partnership begins to heal more than just physical wounds. But can two fiercely independent souls learn to depend on each other without losing themselves? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Henderson's gnarled fingers traced the worn leather of her father's saddle, now propped uselessly against the cabin wall. The morning light filtered through frost-edged windows, casting long shadows across the rough-hewn floorboards. 3 months had passed since that fateful morning, but the memory remained as sharp as the pain in her twisted leg. The rattler had appeared from nowhere, a dusty coil beneath her mare's hooves. One moment she'd been checking fence lines, the next she was airborne, the world spinning in a terrible dance of sky and earth. The crack of her leg against the boulder had echoed across the valley like a gunshot, and Maple, her trusted mare, of 8 years, had bolted into the distance, trailing broken reins behind her. She dragged herself home that day, inch by excruciating inch, the sun burning overhead and then setting, rising again before she finally reached her cabin door. The nearest neighbor was 20 miles away, and her pride had been as strong as her fear. She'd set the leg herself, gritting her teeth around a leather strap, the way her father had taught her during their years alone on the ranch. Now, as she hobbled to her pantry, Sarah tallied her remaining supplies with growing unease. 2 sacks of flour half spoiled, a jar of preserved peaches, 3 potatoes sprouting eyes in the darkness. Her stomach cramped at the sight, a familiar companion these past weeks. The root cellar below held little more. The spring's preserves had been meant for trading, not surviving a winter alone. Outside, the first snow of the season dusted the fence posts like powdered sugar, beautiful and deadly in its promise. Her firewood pile, normally stacked head-high by October, barely reached her waist. Each log she'd gathered had cost her hours of agony, dragging them one at a time from the nearby woods, her legs screaming in protest. Sarah sank into her father's old rocking chair, its creaks matching her own as she eased her weight off her damaged limb. The familiar scent of leather and wood smoke wrapped around her like a worn blanket, but offered little comfort. On the mantel, her mother's clock ticked away the minutes, each sound a reminder of time slipping through her fingers like mountain stream water. "You always said pride would be the death of me, didn't you, Pa?" she whispered to the empty room. The irony wasn't lost on her. How many times had she insisted on handling everything alone, even after his passing 5 years ago? How many offers of help had she politely but firmly refused from the township 15 miles distant? The window pane rattled with a gust of wind, and Sarah pulled her shawl tighter. She'd have to venture out soon, drag in more firewood before the real storms hit. The thought of the pain awaiting her drew a bitter laugh. Pain had become such a constant companion, she could almost greet it like an old friend. A sound outside caught her attention, the sharp crack of a branch breaking under snow's weight. For a moment, hope flared in her chest. Could it be Maple, finally returned home? But no, the mare would have headed for town if she'd survived at all. More likely a deer, or perhaps one of the wolves that had been growing bolder as winter approached. Sarah's hand moved to the rifle propped beside her. Chair, more habit than intent? She couldn't waste the ammunition, not now. Every bullet might mean the difference between eating and starving once the snows truly arrived. Besides, her aim wasn't what it had been before the fall. The constant tremor in her hands saw to that. The day crept by with agonizing slowness. Sarah measured it in small victories, stoking the fire without falling, changing her bandages without crying out, forcing down a meager meal of dry biscuit and preserved fruit. As darkness gathered in the corners of her cabin, she found herself talking aloud again, a habit born of too many silent days. "Just have to make it through winter," she told the shadowed walls. "Spring will come, and with it the traders. Someone will pass by, surely." But even as she spoke the words, their hollowness echoed back at her. Spring was months away, and her supplies wouldn't last 2 weeks at this rate. That night, as the temperature plummeted and the wind howled through the gaps in her cabins, Sarah dreamed of her father. He stood in the doorway, backlit by morning sun, his familiar form straight and strong as she remembered from childhood. "You always were stubborn, girl," he said, his voice rough with concern. "But there's a difference between being strong and being foolish." She woke with tears frozen on her cheeks. The fire nothing but embers in the grate. The dream clung to her like morning mist, and for the first time since the accident, Sarah Henderson admitted to herself what she had been denying for weeks. Without help, she would not survive until spring. The next morning dawned clear and brutal, the kind of cold that turned breath to ice and froze tears before they could fall. Sarah watched the sun rise through her frosted window, each breath a small cloud in the frigid air. Something had changed in the night, beyond the dropping temperature. Perhaps it was her father's words in the dream, or perhaps simply the harsh reality of her dwindling supplies. But the iron grip of her pride had finally begun to loosen. If help didn't come soon, there would be nothing left of Sarah Henderson but a cautionary tale told in whispers around town fires, the stubborn woman who thought she could face a Wyoming winter alone. James Blackwood had always been an early riser, a habit ingrained from decades of ranch life. This morning was no different, finding him in his study before dawn, warming his hands around a cup of coffee while studying boundary maps spread across his mahogany desk. The Blackwood Ranch had grown considerably under his care, but with that growth came responsibility, miles of fence line to check, grazing rights to monitor, and now potential new lands to survey. He pulled his grandfather's brass spyglass from its leather case, a ritual as familiar as saddling his horse. The instrument had guided 3 generations of Blackwoods as they built their legacy in these mountains. Its brass surface caught the first rays of dawn streaming through tall windows, sending golden reflections dancing across the study's dark paneled walls. Within the hour, he was mounted on his stallion, Thunder, the crisp morning air biting at his cheeks as they climbed, the ridge overlooking the northern valley. The sun had barely cleared the eastern peaks, painting the snow-dusted landscape in shades of rose and gold. James raised the spyglass to his eye, beginning his usual sweep of the territory. The movement caught his attention first, a thin line of smoke rising from a stand of pines where he knew no cabin should be. He adjusted the spyglass, frowning. The Henderson place lay in that direction. But old John Henderson had passed 5 years ago, and word was his daughter had moved on after selling the cattle. "What do you make of that, boy?" he murmured to Thunder, who snorted and pawed at the frozen ground. The smoke looked wrong somehow. Too thin, too desperate. James had seen enough winter fires to know the difference between a hearth well tended and one struggling to survive. He turned Thunder toward the distant smoke, conscience warring with courtesy. Dropping in unannounced wasn't his style, but something about that feeble wisp of smoke nagged at him. The ride took longer than expected, the trail obscured by fresh snow and years of disuse. As they drew closer, the cabin's condition told its own story. Broken shutters, gaps in the roof's shingling, a woodpile that wouldn't last a week in this weather. James dismounted at the gate, his boots crunching in the snow. The cabin's window panes were frosted over, but a dim light flickered within. He approached the door, noting the uneven tracks in the snow, a dragging pattern that spoke of injury or illness. His knock echoed in the cold air. For a long moment silence answered. Then came the sound of uneven footsteps and a woman's voice, hoarse with disuse. "Who's there?" "James Blackwood, ma'am, from the Double B Ranch." He kept his voice gentle, neutral. "Spotted your smoke from the ridge. Thought I'd check if everything's all right." Another pause, longer this time. Then the sound of a bolt being drawn back. The door opened just wide enough to reveal Sarah Henderson, though he barely recognized her. The vibrant woman he remembered from town meetings had been replaced by a ghost, thin, pale, with pain etched deep in the lines around her eyes. She leaned heavily against the doorframe, her right leg held awkwardly. "Mr. Blackwood, this is unexpected." Her voice carried a hint of her old strength, despite her obvious condition. "I'm afraid I can't offer you coffee. Ran out some weeks ago." James took in the cabin's interior, visible through the gap, the nearly empty woodbox, the thin blankets piled near the dying fire, the obvious signs of hardship. "Miss Henderson, pardon my directness, but you appear to be in some difficulty." A flash of the old pride crossed her face. "I manage well enough." "No doubt," he said carefully, noting how her fingers whitened where they gripped the doorframe. "But with winter setting in proper, managing might not be enough." He gestured at the woodpile. "That won't last the week, and there's a storm coming. I can smell it on the wind." Sarah's expression wavered between dignity and desperation. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Blackwood. Not offering any," he replied mildly, "but I am offering a business proposition. My ranch hands could use some local knowledge of these parts, and I hear tell you know this valley better than most. Seems to me we might work out an arrangement, your expertise for some basic supplies and assistance." He saw the battle in her eyes, pride wrestling with survival. The wind picked up, carrying the promise of snow, and Sarah shivered despite herself. James waited, patient as the mountains themselves. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "The leg won't heal proper. Doctor in town said as much when it happened. I can't work like I used to." "There's more than one way to work, Miss Henderson." James kept his tone matter-of-fact, free of pity. "Knowledge is worth its weight in gold. Out here, now about that business arrangement, shall we discuss terms where it's warmer? That fire's looking mighty low, and I've got coffee in my saddlebags." For a long moment, Sarah stood motionless in the doorway. Then slowly she stepped back, opening the door wider. "Terms," she said firmly, though her voice shook slightly. "Nothing more." James nodded, understanding all she wasn't saying. "Terms," he agreed, and followed her into the cabin's dim interior, already planning how to save this proud woman's life without breaking her spirit in the process. The coffee's aroma filled the cabin, a bittersweet reminder of better days. Sarah sat stiffly in her father's chair, watching James Blackwood survey her empty larder with careful neutrality. His expression never changed as he took in the single jar of preserves, the mouldering flour sacks, the bare shelves that should have been groaning with winter provisions. "Your root cellar still sound?" he asked, closing the larder door with deliberate gentleness. "Sound enough." Sarah wrapped her hands around the tin cup of coffee he'd brewed, its warmth seeping into her cold, stiffened fingers. "Though there's not much to store in it these days." James nodded, settling himself on a rough-hewn stool by the fire. His presence filled the small cabin in a way that should have been overwhelming, yet somehow wasn't. Perhaps it was the careful distance he maintained, or the way he spoke, direct but never demanding. "I've got 3 crews working the northern ranges," he said, sipping his own coffee. "Good men, but they don't know these mountains like locals do. Weather patterns, hidden springs, the best sheltered valleys for winter grazing. That kind of knowledge takes generations to build." Sarah recognized the opening for what it was. "And you think I have this knowledge? I know you do. Your father was the best tracker in the territory, and word is you're even better. Or were, before." He stopped, but they both knew what hung, unspoken between them, "before I crippled myself." Sarah's voice held a sharp edge. "You can say it, Mr. Blackwood. I've had 3 months to get used to the truth of it." "James," he corrected gently. And I was going to say, before circumstances changed. A person's value isn't measured by their ability to ride fence lines, Miss Henderson. Sarah, she found herself offering, surprising them both. And what exactly would this arrangement of yours entail? James set his cup down, meeting her gaze directly. To start, you share your knowledge of the region. Weather signs, safe passages, where to find grass under snow. In exchange, my men ensure you have proper supplies for the winter. Wood cut, repairs made, food stored. All business, all recorded. In the ranch books as consultation fees. Sarah's fingers tightened around her cup. And when spring comes, we discuss terms again, based on what works for both parties. He paused, then added carefully, I'm not offering to take over your life, Sarah, just proposing a mutually beneficial arrangement to get through a hard season. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the first flakes of the promised storm. Sarah thought of the empty root cellar below, the dwindling woodpile, the long nights ahead. Pride was all well and good, but her father's voice from her dream echoed in her mind. There's a difference between being strong and being foolish. Your men, she said finally. They'd need to understand this is still my property, my home. They'll understand. Something in James's tone suggested anyone who didn't would answer to him personally. I've got two fellows in mind, Tom Wesley and Marcus Reeves, both older hands, been with me over a decade. Tom's got a sister who never walked right after. Viva took her as a child. He understands about difficulties and dignity. Sarah nodded slowly, recognizing the names. Good men by all accounts, not the type to gossip in town or offer unwanted pity. And the terms would be written up? Proper and legal? I'll have papers drawn up in town tomorrow. Everything clear and businesslike. James stood, moving to the window. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes swirling in the strengthening wind. But first, with your permission, I'd like to have Tom and Marcus ride out this afternoon with some immediate supplies. That storm's coming faster than I thought, and business arrangements aside, I'd rest easier knowing you had proper provisions. To wait it out. The old Sarah would have refused outright, but the woman she was now, shaped by pain and hard necessity, recognized the wisdom in his words. Written terms to follow, she verified, holding on to this last piece of dignity. My word on it. James turned from the window, his expression grave. I'll draw them up myself tonight and bring them out once the storm passes. Sarah drew a deep breath, tasting wood smoke and coffee and approaching snow. Very well, Mr. Blackwood. James, we have an arrangement, temporary and provisional, pending proper terms. Temporary and provisional, he agreed, and she caught the glimmer of respect in his eyes. He understood what this concession cost her and valued her more for the strength it took to make it. The rest of the morning passed in careful discussion of what supplies could be reasonably expected that afternoon. Sarah found herself drawing rough maps on spare paper, marking hidden springs and sheltered valleys, sharing the knowledge she'd accumulated over a lifetime in these mountains. James took notes in a small leather notebook, asking intelligent questions that showed he grasped the complexity of winter survival in this harsh country. When he finally mounted up to ride back to his ranch, the snow was falling in earnest. Sarah stood in her doorway, watching until horse and rider disappeared into the swirling white. Only then did she allow herself to sag against the doorframe, overwhelmed by the morning's events and the magnitude of the change she'd accepted. Well, Pa, she whispered to the snowy silence, you always said help comes in unexpected ways. I just hope I'm doing the right thing. The wind caught her words and carried them away, and Sarah Henderson closed her door on the storm, knowing that when she opened it next, her life would be irrevocably changed. The well bucket hung frozen. In the morning air, a solid mass of ice that caught the weak winter sun like a crystal. Sarah stared at it from her doorway, calculating the effort it would take to break the ice and draw fresh water. Even with Tom and Marcus's help keeping her. Woodpile stocked. Every venture outside was a battle against pain and cold. A week had passed since James Blackwood's first visit, and true to his word, the supplies had arrived that very afternoon. Tom and Marcus had worked quickly and quietly, stacking wood, filling her larder, and making basic repairs while the storm raged. They'd returned every other day since, always announcing their arrival with a respectful knock and waiting for her permission to begin their tasks. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention from the frozen bucket. James himself rode through the swirling snow, his broad-shouldered figure familiar now against the white landscape. He dismounted carefully, leading his horse to the sheltered side of the cabin where Tom had repaired the lean-to. "Morning, Sarah," he called, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "Thought I'd check how those maps we discussed are coming along." His eyes went to the well bucket, and without comment, he detoured to break the ice and draw fresh water before approaching the cabin. "Maps are on the table," she replied, stepping back to let him enter. The cabin was warm now, properly warm, with a steady supply of wood to feed the fire. "But I've been thinking about your question regarding the spring grazing lands." James shed his heavy coat, hanging it by the door. He'd brought coffee again, and Sarah found herself looking forward to these morning planning sessions. There was something comforting about sharing the quiet hours with someone who neither demanded conversation nor feared silence. "The valley you mentioned?" he asked, setting up the coffee pot with practiced ease. "Yes. It's better than you think and worse." Sarah spread out her rough maps on the table, weighing the corners with stones. "The grass there stays green longer than anywhere else in the territory, but there's a reason locals avoid it in early spring." James pulled up a chair, his interest evident. "Go on." "The meadow floods." Sarah's finger traced the contours she'd drawn. "Not obviously. That's the danger. The water seeps up from underground when the snow melts, turns the whole valley into a bog. Lots of good grass showing above, but a cow steps wrong and she'll sink to her belly. That's valuable information." James made a note in his leather book. "Could save us a lot of trouble come spring." "How'd you learn about it?" "Lost 3 good cattle there my first year running the ranch after Pa died." Sarah's voice held old pain, but also pride in the lesson learned. "Found the high ground trail around it, though. Here." She sketched another line on the map. "Takes longer, but it's solid ground all the way." James studied the route she'd drawn, asking occasional questions about landmarks and timing. As they talked, the coffee perked and the morning light strengthened, casting long shadows through the frost-etched windows. "Your knowledge of this land is remarkable," he said finally, sitting back with his coffee cup. "Makes me wonder why you never wrote it all down before." Sarah shrugged, but the compliment warmed her more than she cared to admit. "Never seemed necessary. It's all up here." She tapped her temple. "Besides, who'd want to read an old woman's scribblings about weather signs and hidden springs?" "You're hardly old," James replied mildly, "and I can think of several ranchers who'd pay good money for this information, myself included." "Is that another business proposition, Mr. Blackwood?" The formality was teasing now, the edge of defensiveness gone from their exchanges. "Always thinking ahead." He smiled, but his eyes were serious. "Knowledge like yours shouldn't be lost, Sarah. It's as much a part of this territory as the mountains themselves." The fire crackled, sending up sparks. Outside, the wind had died down, leaving the world hushed under its blanket of snow. Sarah found herself studying James's profile as he bent over the maps again. There was a steadiness to him that had nothing to do with his wealth or position, a quality that reminded her oddly of her father. "I've been watching the sky," she said abruptly. "Storm coming, bigger than the last. 3 days, maybe 4. James looked up, reading something in her tone. "How can you tell?" "The way the snow falls now, too light, like it's gathering strength. And there's a ring around the moon at night. My grandmother taught me the signs when I was young." "Never failed yet." He nodded, accepting her wisdom without question. "I'll send Tom and Marcus out tomorrow with extra supplies, just in case." "Anything specific you need?" Sarah hesitated, then decided honesty was part of their arrangement. "The leg's been worse with the cold. Some liniment wouldn't go amiss if it's not too much trouble. I'll see to it personally." His voice was carefully neutral, respecting her pride while acknowledging her need. "Anything else?" "No, She stopped, surprised by the lump in her throat. "You've done more than enough." James stood, gathering his coat. "Part of our business arrangement, remember? Speaking of which," he pulled an envelope from his pocket. "The formal terms as promised. Take your time reading them over. We can discuss any changes you want to make." Sarah took the envelope, noting the quality of the paper. "Thank you. I'll look them over today." He paused at the door, glancing at the frozen well bucket. "Tom mentioned the well's been giving you trouble. I could have him rig up a pulley system, make it easier to draw water. I'd appreciate that." The words came easier now, acceptance of help no longer feeling like surrender. After he'd ridden away, Sarah sat for a long time with the unopened envelope in her hands, watching the snow begin to fall again. Something was changing, as surely. As the seasons turned, and for the first time since her accident, she felt a flutter of hope beneath her ribs. The leather-bound book was worn smooth with age, its pages yellow and spotted with time. Sarah ran her fingers over her grandmother's flowing script, recipes and remedies recorded in fading ink. The storm James had predicted raged outside, but inside, the cabin was warm and filled with the scent of herbs steeping in the pot hanging. "Over the fire, Grandmother swore by this mixture," she explained, stirring the aromatic brew. "Yarrow for inflammation, willow bark for pain, and a touch of honey to make it palatable." The recipe book lay open on her lap, though she knew the words by heart. James sat nearby, watching with genuine interest. He'd arrived just before the storm hit, bringing not only the promised liniment, but also news from town, and surprisingly, a desire to learn about her family's traditional remedies. "Your grandmother was a healer?" he asked, accepting a cup of the steaming liquid. "Of sorts. More a keeper of old knowledge." Sarah settled back in her chair, the book's familiar weight comforting. She came west with nothing but this book, and her faith in the old ways. Learnt new ones from the local tribes, added them to these pages, said every piece of knowledge saved was a life potentially spared. James sipped the tea, his expression thoughtful. She was right. Too many folks nowadays think progress means forgetting the wisdom of the past. He gestured to the book. "May I?" Sarah hesitated only briefly before passing him the precious volume. James handled it with appropriate reverence, his strong hands gentle as he turned the delicate pages. "For fever in cattle," he read aloud. "Gather bloodroot by the waning moon." "This is remarkable, Sarah. The detail, the observations, it's not just recipes, it's a complete understanding of the land and its gifts." Pa used to say grandmother could read the land like most folks read their Bible. Sarah smiled at the memory. "She taught me everything she knew. Which plants to gather, when to harvest them, how to store them properly. Those skills saved our cattle more than once when we couldn't afford a veterinarian." A particularly strong gust rattled the windows, and James looked up from the book. "Speaking of reading the land, your storm prediction was spot on. This one's got a real bite to it. It'll last another day at least." Sarah reached for her cup, wincing slightly as her leg protested the movement. Without comment, James handed it to her, his attention returning to the book. "These drawings," he said, studying a page of carefully sketched plants. "Your grandmother's work?" "Some, others are mine." Sarah felt a flush of pride at his evident admiration. "I added to the book over the years. Seemed important to keep the knowledge growing." James turned another page, then stopped, his expression changing. "This is interesting. Notes about the Graham Valley property. Watch for signs of rustlers in the Box Canyon." Sarah's breath caught. "That's recent, from last summer, before—" She gestured at her leg. "There had been rumors of cattle going missing. I was tracking them, trying to find proof." James's head came up sharply. "Did you find any?" "Nothing concrete, but there were signs, cattle trails where they shouldn't be, strange tracks near the water holes." She frowned, remembering. "I meant to check the Box Canyon again, but then the Accident happened. Tom mentioned seeing unusual activity up that way last week. James's voice was carefully neutral. Would you mind if I copied down some of these notes? Might help us keep an eye on things. Of course. Sarah reached for a fresh piece of paper, then hesitated. Actually, you should take the book for now, she added quickly, seeing his surprise. It would be more useful at your ranch, with all those cattle to look after, and it's not doing much good sitting here with me. Sarah, James closed the book gently, this is your family's legacy. I couldn't. You're not keeping it, she interrupted, her voice firm. Just borrowing it. Put it to good use. That's what grandmother would have wanted. He studied her face for a long moment, understanding the magnitude of what she was offering. Thank you. I'll make sure it's returned safely. See that you... Oh, do. Sarah managed a small smile. Some of those remedies won't be needed until spring, but when they are, they're vital. Speaking of spring, James said carefully, I've been thinking about your observations of the Graham Valley. Once the weather breaks... He paused, choosing his words. Would you consider acting as a consultant for a more thorough investigation? Your knowledge of the area would be invaluable. Sarah's hands tightened on her cup. I'm not much use in the saddle these days. There are other ways to investigate. Maps, planning, coordinating the men. He set the recipe book aside. Your mind is as sharp as ever, Sarah. Don't let a bad leg make you forget that. The fire popped, sending up sparks. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but in this moment, Sarah felt something shift inside her. A realization that perhaps her worth wasn't measured by what she could no longer do, but by what she still could. I'll think about it, she said finally. James nodded, accepting her answer without pushing. He rose to add another log to the fire, and Sarah watched him move about her cabin with easy familiarity. When had his presence become so natural, she wondered, so unremarkable? The recipe book sat between them on the table, its worn cover a bridge between past and present, between what was lost and what might yet be found. In its pages, Sarah's grandmother had written not just remedies and recipes, but a philosophy of life. Everything changes, but knowledge, properly tended, endures. Tell me more about your grandmother, James said, settling back in his chair. I'd like to hear about the woman who created such a remarkable legacy. And so, as the storm raged and the fire burned low, Sarah began to share the stories written, not in the book but in her heart. Tales of strength, wisdom, and the quiet power of knowing one's own worth. The mirror had hung on the cabin wall since Sarah was a child, its gilt frame tarnished but still elegant. One of the few fine things her mother had brought west. Now it lay shattered on the floor, reflecting her pale face in dozens of broken pieces. The pain had struck without warning, a white-hot lance through her damaged leg that sent her stumbling. She'd reached for support and found only air, crashing against the wall where the mirror hung. For a long moment, she lay there among the glittering shards, tears of pain and frustration freezing on her cheeks in the pre-dawn chill. The accident itself wasn't what broke her. It was catching sight of herself in those scattered pieces, gaunt, grey-faced, looking every bit the invalid she'd fought so hard not to become. A sob tore from her throat, raw and primal, echoing in the empty cabin. She didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats over her own ragged breathing, didn't hear the quick footsteps on the porch. The door burst open, letting in a blast of cold air, and James Blackwood's tall figure. Sarah! He took in the scene in one swift glance, the broken mirror, her crumpled form, the blood where a shard had caught her hand. Without hesitation, he crossed the room and knelt beside her, heedless of the glass. Don't, she tried to warn him off, humiliation burning hotter than the pain. I'm fine, You're not fine. His voice was gentle but firm. And there's no shame in that. He surveyed her injuries with careful eyes. Can you move your leg? Sarah nodded, though the thought of moving anything made her stomach clench. Nothing's broken. Just the old injury acting up. I lost my balance. Let's get you up then. Easy. Now. His strength was surprising as he helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight. The movement sent fresh waves of pain through her leg, and she couldn't quite suppress a gasp. James's arm tightened around her waist. "I'm taking you to town. That leg needs looking at." "No!" The word came out sharper than she intended. "No doctors. Please, I can't hear again how nothing can be done. How I'll never—" Her voice broke, and she felt James go very still beside her. "All right," he said after a moment. "No doctors. But you're going to let me help you, Sarah. No arguments." He got her settled in her chair, then set about building up the fire and brewing coffee. Sarah watched through pain-glazed eyes as he moved around her cabin with familiar efficiency, gathering supplies for basic first aid. "Your hand's bleeding," he noted, kneeling beside her chair with clean bandages. "May I?" She nodded, too drained to protest. His hands were warm and gentle as he cleaned the cut, picking out tiny fragments of mirror with tweezers from her mother's old sewing kit. "I look a proper fool," she said finally, staring at the shattered mirror. "Crying over a bit of broken glass and a bad leg. You look human." James finished bandaging her hand. "And you've been strong for too long." "Have I?" Sarah laughed, but it came out more like a sob. "All I've done is hide away, pretending I could manage alone. And look, what that got me, flat on my floor at dawn, crying like a child." "Is that what you think you've been doing?" James's voice held an edge now. "Sarah, you survived 3 months alone with a crippling injury in one of the harshest territories in Wyoming. You kept this cabin standing, kept yourself alive, never gave up. That's not hiding, that's pure courage." "Courage?" She gestured at the broken mirror. "Does this look like courage to you?" "Yes." He caught her gaze and held it. "Because you're still here, still fighting, and now you're finally letting someone help you fight." Something broke inside her then. Not like the mirror's sudden shatter, but like spring ice cracking on a river, letting the current flow free at last. The tears came again, but different this time, cleansing rather than bitter. James said nothing, just kept his hand on hers while she wept. When the storm passed, he brought her coffee and a damp cloth for her face, his movements unhurried and matter-of-fact. "I've been thinking," he said, as she sipped the hot coffee, "about your leg. There's a doctor in Denver who specializes in old injuries, worked with cavalry veterans after the war. He might have some ideas worth considering." "Denver's a long way," Sarah murmured, but she didn't say no. "Spring's coming. Once the pass is clear." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The ranch could use a consultant for an extended period. Someone who knows the territory, could help plan the spring moves while getting proper medical attention." Sarah looked at him over her coffee cup. "That's quite an elaborate business arrangement, Mr. Blackwood." "James," he corrected softly. "And yes, it is. But I think we're past pretending this is just business, aren't we?" The morning light was strengthening, catching the mirror fragments on the floor and sending rainbow reflections dancing across the walls. Sarah watched them, remembering her mother's stories about broken mirrors and 7 years' bad luck. "I'm not an easy woman," she said finally. "Too proud, Pa always said. Too set in my ways. Good thing I'm not looking for an easy woman." James's smile held warmth and something more. "I've got enough yes-men at the ranch. What I need is someone who'll tell me true, someone who knows this land and loves it like I do. And my leg is part of who you are now, not all of who you are." He stood, brushing glass dust from his knees. "Think about Denver. No pressure, no obligations. Just think about it." Sarah nodded slowly. "I will." He began cleaning up the broken mirror, careful to collect every shard. When he was done, the wall looked strangely bare, but somehow the empty space felt more like possibility than loss. "I'll send Tom by later with some supplies," James said, pulling on his coat. "Try to rest that leg today." "James," she called as he reached the door. He turned, and Sarah forced herself to continue. "Thank you for being here." His smile warmed her more than the fire. "Always will be, Sarah. That's a promise." After he left, Sarah sat for a long time, watching the sunrise paint the cabin walls gold. Where the mirror had hung, she could now see a patch of wood that was different, lighter, protected all these years. Like her own heart, she realized, preserved, beneath its careful shields, waiting for the right moment to emerge into the light. James sat at Sarah's kitchen table, sheets of high-quality leather spread before him, his pencil moving with quiet purpose across the surface. Afternoon light slanted through the windows, catching the silver in his hair as he worked. Sarah watched. From her chair by the fire, curiosity finally overwhelming her resolve to let him work in peace. "What exactly are you designing?" she asked, noting the precise measurements and detailed notes along the margins of the leather. He glanced up, a hint of excitement in his eyes. "Something I should have thought of weeks ago." He beckoned her closer. "Come see." Sarah made her way to the table, her leg less painful today thanks to her grandmother's remedies and proper rest. The sketches showed what appeared to be modified riding equipment, but unlike anything she'd seen before. "The standard saddle puts too much strain on your injured leg," James explained, pointing to his drawings. "But what if we redistributed the weight? See here." His finger traced a series of adjustable straps and supports. Custom-fitted bracing, built right into the saddle itself. Sarah leaned closer, her breath catching as she understood. "You don't think I could ride again? I know you can." His certainty warmed her. "It won't be exactly like before, but with the right equipment." He pulled out another sketch, this one showing a modified stirrup design. "The challenge is supporting your leg, while still allowing you to control the horse." She studied the drawings, years of horsemanship, allowing her to envision how each modification would work. "The angle here," she pointed to one strap, "it would need to be adjustable. Some days the leg's worse than others." "Exactly what I was thinking." James made a note on the leather. "And here, see how the stirrup's designed to release quickly if you need it. Safety first." Sarah sank into the chair beside him, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "You've put so much thought into this." "Had some help, actually." He smiled, pulling out a letter from his pocket. "Been corresponding with a saddle maker in Denver, the same city as that doctor I mentioned. Man's been crafting custom equipment for injured cavalry veterans. Says he's never seen a problem he couldn't solve with enough leather and ingenuity." Hope, that dangerous emotion she'd been holding at bay, bloomed in Sarah's chest. "And you think he could make this?" "Already agreed to try." "Sent him your measurements and a detailed description of the injury." James paused, suddenly uncertain. "I hope you don't mind. I didn't want to say anything until I knew it was possible." "Mind?" Sarah laughed, the sound startling them both. "James Blackwood, you're giving me back the sky." Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. James's hand moved as if to cover hers, then stopped, remembering propriety. Sarah found herself wishing he hadn't. "There's more," he said, pulling out another sketch. "Ideas for modifying your daily tasks, ways to make the well easier to manage, adaptations for handling livestock. Tom's brother's a carpenter. He's willing to come out and make whatever changes you need to the cabin." Sarah traced the careful drawings with a fingertip. "Why are you doing all this?" "Because you deserve to live fully, not just survive." James's voice was low, intense. "Because I've watched you fight every day to maintain your independence, and I want to help you win that fight." "And what do you get out of it?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. James was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the leather sketches. "The pleasure of seeing you ride again, of knowing I helped make it possible." He paused, then added softly, "of having you as a partner in more than just business matters, if you're willing." The word partner hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Sarah thought of all the changes the past weeks had brought, not just the practical improvements to her life, but the deeper transformation in how she saw herself and her future. "I'm still learning how to accept help," she said carefully. "How to trust that it doesn't mean giving up who I am." "I know." James's smile held understanding. "And I'm learning how to offer help without overshadowing your strength. We can learn together, if you'd like." Outside, a Chinook wind was blowing, that strange warm breeze that sometimes interrupted winter's grip. It carried the first hint of spring, of change and renewal. "The saddle maker," Sarah said finally. "How soon could he start?" "Soon as the pass is clear. I thought—" James hesitated, then continued, "I thought we might make the trip to Denver together. The doctor could examine your leg, the saddle maker could take proper measurements, and you could see for yourself what's possible." "Together?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "That would set tongues wagging in town." "Let them wag." James's voice held a note of challenge. "Unless you're concerned about your reputation." "At my age?" She snorted. "I'm more concerned about yours, Mr. Blackwood. What will your fancy business associates think about you traveling with a crippled rancher woman?" "First," he said firmly, "you're not crippled. You're adapting. Second, my business associates' opinions matter far less to me than your comfort and well-being." Sarah looked again at the sketches spread across her table. Tangible proof of his commitment to helping her rebuild her life, not out of pity or charity, but out of genuine respect and something more, something growing between them as steady and sure as the spring grass. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to Denver. Yes to all of it." She met his gaze steadily. "The saddle, the doctor, the trip, and the partnership, whatever form it takes." James's smile blazed like sunrise. Propriety forgotten, he caught her hand and pressed it warmly. "We'll take it one step at a time. First the practical matters, then we'll see what spring brings." Sarah finished and found herself smiling back. They spent the rest of the afternoon refining the sketches, Sarah's practical experience combining with James's innovative ideas. The leather sheets gradually filled with notes and modifications, becoming not just plans for equipment, but a blueprint for a future neither of them had imagined possible just months ago. And if their hands brushed more often than strictly necessary, if their shared glances held more warmth than mere friendship required, well, that was nobody's business but their own. The leather working tools arrived from Denver in a polished wooden case, each piece nestled in velvet like precious jewels. Sarah ran her fingers over the stamping tools, awls and burnishes, remembering how her father had taught her the basics of leather craft when she was young. That knowledge had served her well over the years, mending tack and making simple repairs. But this was craftsmanship of a different order entirely. "The saddle maker sent detailed instructions," James said, unfolding a letter covered in precise drawings. "He wants us to make some prototype pieces before attempting the full saddle. Says it'll help him understand exactly how your leg responds to different support systems." They'd cleared Sarah's kitchen table, covering it with thick leather pieces. And the new tools. The morning light streamed through windows Tom had recently reglazed, casting warm patterns across their workspace. The cabin smelled of leather and coffee, and something else. Possibility. "Where do we start?" Sarah asked. Picking up a curved awl with reverent care, James spread out the first set of patterns, with the stirrup support. "It's the most crucial component. Has to be strong enough to brace your leg, but flexible enough to allow quick release if needed." He paused, studying her face. "You're sure you want to help with this? I need to understand how." "It works," Sarah interrupted firmly. "Every strap, every buckle. My life might depend on it someday." He nodded, respect evident in his expression. "Fair enough. Let's begin with the basic measurements." The morning passed in focused work, their hands learning to move together as they cut and shaped the leather. Sarah found her old skills returning, enhanced by James's patient instruction in the finer points of the craft. He had an artist's eye for detail and an engineer's understanding of stress points and load distribution. "Here," he said, guiding her hands as she struggled with a particularly stubborn piece. "Let the tool do the work. Don't force it." His presence behind her was warm, steady, and Sarah found herself leaning back slightly, accepting his support, as naturally as breathing. "Like this?" She adjusted her grip, feeling the leather yield more easily. Perfect. His breath stirred her hair, and neither of them moved away immediately. These moments of closeness had been happening more frequently. little breaks in propriety that felt increasingly right. A knock at the door startled them apart. Tom entered, stamping snow from his boots. "Package from town, Miss Henderson. Express delivery." He set a small parcel on the edge of the table, his eyes taking in the leather working setup with interest. "Thank you, Tom." Sarah smiled at the ranch hand who'd become a familiar presence in her life. "How are the cattle doing in this weather?" "Managing well enough, thanks to those sheltered valleys you told us about." Tom's weathered face creased in a grin. "Boss was right about your knowledge being worth its weight in gold." James looked up from where he was adjusting a pattern. "Tom, you remember how to do that fancy braiding your grandmother taught you? Might need some of that expertise for this project." "Happy to help, Mr. Blackwood." Tom moved closer, examining their work with a craftsman's eye. "This for Miss Henderson's new saddle?" "The first test pieces," James confirmed. "Want to learn the basics so we can communicate clearly with the saddle maker in Denver." Tom nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking. My sister's special shoes took 3 tries before the cobbler got them right. Having proper models makes all the difference." Sarah opened the package while the men discussed technical details. Inside was a small book on cavalry riding techniques, dog-eared and well-worn. A note fell out. "Thought this might be useful. Dr. Matthews, Denver." She recognized James's hand in this, his quiet way of preparing her for the changes ahead. "Look at this," she called, showing them an illustration of a modified riding position. "If we adjusted the stirrup angle here..." She sketched quickly on a scrap of leather, her practical experience combining with the book's theory. James leaned over her shoulder, his hand covering hers as he traced the proposed modification. "Yes, that could work. Tom, what do you think?" "About the stability." They worked together through the afternoon, 3 different perspectives merging into something new. Tom's experience with his sister's adaptations proved invaluable, while James's innovative thinking pushed them beyond conventional solutions. And Sarah's intimate understanding of both horses and her own limitations kept their ideas grounded in practical reality. The first prototype was far from perfect, the stitching uneven, the support not quite right. But as Sarah ran her hands over their creation, she felt a surge of triumph. This wasn't just about riding again. It was about proving that limitations could be overcome, that weakness could become strength with enough determination and help. "We'll do better tomorrow," James said, reading her expression. "This is just the beginning." Tom gathered his tools, preparing to leave. "Miss Henderson," he said hesitantly, "would you mind if I brought my sister by sometime? Think it might do her good to see all this." He gestured at their work. "I'd like that," Sarah replied softly, understanding what he wasn't saying. Hope was contagious, and sometimes seeing someone else overcome similar challenges could light the way forward. After Tom left, Sarah and James began cleaning up, their movements synchronized by now. The wooden case closed over the tools with a satisfying click, promising more progress tomorrow. "Thank you," Sarah said suddenly, "for making me part of this, for not just doing it for me." James paused in rolling up the patterns. "Wouldn't have worked without your input." "This isn't charity, Sarah. It's collaboration, partnership." His voice deepened on the last word, giving it weight beyond its surface meaning. She met his gaze steadily. "Partnership," she agreed, and they both knew they weren't just talking about leather work anymore. The setting sun painted the leather scraps gold, transforming their humble workspace into something almost magical. Tomorrow they would continue, each stitch and cut bringing them closer to their goal. But for now, Sarah simply savored the moment, the satisfaction of work well begun, the comfort of shared purpose, and the growing certainty that she was not just rebuilding her ability to ride, but crafting an entirely new future, stitch by careful stitch. The cane appeared on Sarah's doorstep one morning, propped carefully against the wall. She'd know Tom's handiwork anywhere. The careful whittling, the smooth curves, the subtle designs worked into the wood. But it was the grip that caught her eye, carved to fit her hand exactly, as if he'd been studying how she steadied herself. Against chairs and tables all these weeks, she stood in the doorway studying it. The wood was dark with oil, sturdy but not heavy, the perfect height for her frame. A tool, not a crutch. A way forward, not a mark of defeat. "Do you like it?" James's voice came from behind her, and she turned to find him leading his horse up the path, his breath visible in the crisp morning air. "Did you put him up to this?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "Just mentioned that you might appreciate something more elegant than chair backs for support." He drew closer, hands in his pockets. "Tom did the rest, said he's been wanting to thank you for all the advice about the cattle." Sarah picked up the cane, testing its weight. The grip settled into her palm like a handshake from an old friend. "It's beautiful work." "Try it," James encouraged, but made no move to help her. He'd learned when to offer support and when to stand back, a delicate dance they were both still mastering. Sarah took a tentative step, then another. The cane moved with her naturally, supporting without constraining. She made her way down the porch steps, each movement more confident than the last. "Well?" James asked, watching her face. "It helps," she admitted, surprising herself with how easily the words came. A few months ago, such an admission would have felt like surrender. Now it felt like progress. "Good." He smiled, then nodded toward the barn. "Because I brought something else you might want to see." They walked together, Sarah setting her own pace with the cane, James matching his stride to hers without making it obvious. The morning sun cast long shadows across the snow, and their breath mingled in the cold air. The barn door stood open, and inside Sarah could see Tom adjusting the straps on what appeared to be— "Is that—" She stopped, gripping the cane tighter. "Just a test fitting," James said quickly. "The real saddle won't be ready for weeks yet, but we thought you might want to try the basic position, see how it feels." The practice saddle was crude compared to their finished design plans, but the essential elements were there. The modified stirrup, the extra support straps, the adjusted seat angle. And beneath it stood one of James's gentlest mares, a dun-colored beauty with patient eyes. "Her name's Dawn," James said softly. "She's carried injured riders before, knows how to compensate for an uneven seat." Sarah moved forward slowly, letting the mare catch her scent. Dawn's ears flicked forward with interest, and she stretched her neck to blow softly against Sarah's palm. "Hello, lovely," Sarah murmured, feeling the familiar connection that had been part of her life since childhood. Her fingers found the spots all horses love to be scratched, and Dawn's eyes half closed in contentment. "You still speak their language," James observed, leaning against the barn door. "Some things you don't forget." Sarah ran her hand down Dawn's neck, remembering countless mornings like this one. "Even when you think you've lost everything, some things stay with you." Tom finished adjusting the straps and stepped back. "Want to try it, Miss Henderson? No pressure, just sitting. Mr. Blackwood and I will be right here." Sarah looked at the saddle, then down at the cane in her hand. "I don't know if I'm ready." "Then we wait," James said simply. "Dawn's not going anywhere. This is your choice, your timing." But Sarah was already moving, her hand sliding along, Dawn's shoulder to the stirrup. Some decisions she was learning were better made in motion than in thought. "Help me up." James stepped forward immediately, his hands strong and sure as they found her waist. Tom stood ready on Dawn's other side, but let them work it out together. Sarah used the cane for balance as she positioned herself, then handed it to Tom. With James's support, she gripped the saddle horn and began the familiar movement that her body remembered, even if her injured leg protested. The first attempt failed, pain shooting through her leg. Sarah bit back a cry of frustration. "Again?" James asked quietly. "Again," she confirmed, adjusting her grip. This time, with a better understanding of how her leg would respond, she managed to swing up and into the saddle. The position was strange, higher on one side than she was used to, with extra support where she needed it most. But she was mounted, sitting tall on horseback for the first time in months. Dawn stood perfectly still, as if understanding the importance of this moment. Sarah's hands found the reins, muscle memory taking over. Her leg ached, but the support straps helped, distributing her weight in ways that made it manageable. "How does it feel?" James asked, his hand resting lightly on Dawn's shoulder, ready to help if needed. Sarah took a deep breath, cataloguing sensations, different, but possible. She looked down at him, suddenly seeing their height difference from this new angle. "I think this might work." "Course it'll work," Tom said confidently, handing her back the cane. "Just needs practice and patience. Like breaking a colt, you don't expect perfection first time out." They let her sit for a few more minutes, making mental notes about what adjustments would be needed. When the pain in her leg grew too intense to ignore, Sarah nodded to James. He helped her down as carefully as he'd helped her up, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. Back on solid ground, Sarah found herself blinking back tears. But they weren't tears of frustration or loss this time. They were tears of possibility, of hope. "Thank you," she said, looking at both men, "for the cane, for this, for understanding." "Small steps," James reminded her, but his eyes were bright with shared triumph. "We'll get there." Tom led Dawn back to her stall, leaving them alone in the barn doorway. Sarah leaned on her new cane, watching the morning light spread across the snow-covered yard. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," she said softly. "Like a rider, like myself." James's hand found hers, warm and work-roughened. "You've always been yourself, Sarah. You just needed reminding." She looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face. "And you're quite good at reminding me." His smile deepened the creases around his eyes. "I plan to keep at it if you'll let me." "I think I will," Sarah said, and squeezed his hand before letting go. They walked back to the cabin together, their footprints and the mark of her cane tracking a new path across the snow. The first crocus pushed through the melting snow beside Sarah's porch steps, its purple petals barely larger than her thumbnail. She knelt carefully, using her cane for balance, and touched the delicate bloom. Such a brave little thing, defying winter's lingering grip with nothing but stored sunshine and stubborn hope. "First sign of spring," James said from behind her. He'd taken to arriving earlier each morning, bringing not just ranch business, but a comfortable companionship that filled the cabin's once lonely spaces. The passes should clear soon. "Denver," Sarah murmured, thinking of the journey ahead. The doctor's letters had been encouraging, speaking of new treatments and possibilities. The saddle maker's latest sketches showed promising refinements to their design, but it wasn't just medical hopes that quickened her pulse when she thought of the trip. James knelt beside her, his shoulder brushing hers as he studied the flower. Having second thoughts? No. She surprised herself with how quickly, how firmly the answer came. "But I am having thoughts." He turned to look at her, patience in his expression. "Want to share them?" Sarah traced the crocus petal with one finger, choosing her words carefully. "When my leg was first injured, I thought that was the end. Of riding, of ranching, of everything that made me who I was. Even these past months, working with you, planning the saddle, I've been afraid to hope too much. And now I find myself hoping for all sorts of things." She met his eyes briefly, then looked back at the flower. "Things that have nothing to do with riding or ranching." James's hand found hers in the melting snow, warm and certain. "Good things, I hope. Scary things," she admitted. "Wonderful, terrifying things that I'd given up wanting." "Sarah." His voice held such tenderness that she had to look at him again. "You're allowed to want things, to hope for them, to reach for them." The morning sun caught the silver in his hair, the laugh lines around his eyes, and Sarah felt something shift. Inside her, like winter ice breaking up, like spring earth softening for new growth. "The town will talk," she said, but without real concern. "Let them. They've been talking since I first started riding out here. Might as well give them something worth talking about." A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her. "James Blackwood, are you suggesting we create a scandal?" "I'm suggesting," he said seriously, though his eyes danced, "that we stop pretending this is just about saddles and business arrangements." The crocus nodded in a breath of spring wind, scattering droplets of melted snow. Sarah looked at their joined hands, at the flower pushing up through winter's remnants, at the man who had become so much more than a neighbor offering help. "I'd like that," she said softly, not pretending any more. "Good." He squeezed her hand gently. "Because I have plans for that garden of yours that go well beyond spring flowers, if you're willing to hear them." Sarah felt her heart expand like the crocus reaching for the sun. "I'm willing to hear quite a lot from you these days, Mr. Blackwood." "Well then, Miss Henderson," he helped her to her feet with the easy strength she'd come to rely on. "Shall we go inside and talk about those plans? It seems we have a future to discuss." They left the crocus nodding in the morning breeze, its single bloom a promise of more to come. Like the flower, Sarah felt herself unfurling toward possibility, no longer afraid of what new growth might bring. The modified stirrup gleamed in the early morning light, its carefully crafted design the result of countless hours of work and refinement. Sarah ran her fingers over the smooth metal and leather, feeling the subtle differences that might make riding possible again. The practice saddle had been replaced with their first complete prototype, each piece adjusted based on what they'd learned. "Everything's ready," James said quietly. He stood beside Dawn, one hand on the mare's neck, watching Sarah with careful attention. "But we only do this if you're certain." Sarah gripped her cane tighter, studying the setup. They'd chosen the gentlest slope on her property for this first real attempt at riding. Tom waited at the far end of the path, ready to help if needed. The morning was clear and cool, perfect for what they planned to attempt. "I'm certain," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it completely. The fear was still there, but it no longer ruled her. "Help me up?" They'd practiced the mounting sequence dozens of times, refining it until it felt almost natural. James's hands were steady at her waist, supporting but not lifting, as she used the modified stirrup to pull herself up. Her leg protested, but the new design distributed her weight exactly as they'd planned. For a moment, she sat perfectly still, adjusting to the sensation. The saddle felt different from their practice version, more secure, more refined. The extra support cradled her injured leg without restricting her movement. "How does it feel?" James asked, still standing close. Sarah took a deep breath, straightening her spine. "Like coming home." He smiled, understanding in his eyes. "Ready to try moving?" "Stay close," she said, gathering the reins. It wasn't just fear making her. Voice soft. These moments of shared vulnerability had become precious to them both. Dawn moved at the slightest pressure, smooth as honey. Sarah felt muscles long unused remembering their purpose, muscle memory adapting to the new position. The modified stirrup kept her legs secure, even as they began a slow walk down the gentle slope. James walked beside them, one hand ready but not touching, letting Sarah find her own balance. Each step brought more confidence, more certainty. By the time they reached Tom at the path's end, Sarah was sitting tall, her face flushed with triumph. "Looking good, Miss Henderson," Tom called, his weathered face creased in a smile. "Want to try the turn?" Sarah nodded, too focused to speak. The turn would be the real test. It had been the hardest part to engineer in the saddle's design. She shifted her weight slightly, using the new supports, and Dawn responded perfectly, pivoting with careful grace. The movement sent a spike of pain through her leg, sharp enough to draw a gasp. James was there instantly, hand on her knee, steadying. "Enough for today?" he asked, no judgment in his voice, but Sarah shook her head. "Once more. I need to know I can do it." He stepped back, respecting her decision. Sarah guided Dawn through the turn again, adjusting her position slightly. This time the pain was manageable, expected. She completed the circuit, drawing Dawn to a stop where they'd started. "Well?" James asked, but his smile said he already knew. "It works." Sarah's voice shook with emotion. "It really works." The dismount was harder than mounting had been, but they managed it together, the three of them working as a seamless team. Once on the ground, Sarah found herself wrapped in James's embrace, her cane forgotten as she returned his hug with fierce joy. "You did it," he murmured into her hair. "We did it," she corrected, drawing back to include Tom in her smile. "All of us." They led Dawn back to the barn together, Sarah walking with new confidence despite her fatigue. One short ride might seem like a small victory to some, but they all understood what it meant, not just the return of mobility, but the triumph of persistence over adversity, of hope over fear. And if James's hand found hers as they walked, if their fingers intertwined with the same careful certainty that had crafted the stirrup that made it all possible, well, that felt like victory too. The leather-bound training journal lay open on Sarah's kitchen table, its pages filled with careful notes in both her handwriting and James's. Weather conditions, pain levels, riding times, equipment adjustments. Each entry told the story of her journey back to horsemanship. But between the technical details, other notes had begun to appear. Shared coffee at sunrise. First laugh. In the saddle. Dawn seemed to know exactly what was needed today. Sarah added today's entry with particular satisfaction. Rode for 30 minutes. Completed full circuit of the north pasture. Leg pain manageable. Jay says my seat is stronger. "You're too modest," James said, reading over her shoulder as he set fresh coffee on the table. "You did more than complete the circuit. You handled that spook when the rabbit jumped out without even flinching." She smiled, accepting the coffee. "Dawn did the work there. Dawn responded to your confidence." He sat beside her, closer than propriety might dictate, but those boundaries had been softening lately. "You're becoming a team again." Sarah turned, back a few pages tracking her progress. The early entries were sparse, clinical, attempt failed, pain severe, try again tomorrow. But gradually, hope had crept in between the lines, along with something else. Something warm and personal that had nothing to do with riding and everything to do with the man whose coffee cup now sat next to hers. The saddle maker's letter. "Came today," she said, pulling the envelope from between the journal's pages. "He's impressed with our progress reports, says he's incorporating our modifications into the final design. And the doctor? Says we're right on schedule for the Denver trip." Sarah traced the rim of her cup. "Though I'm beginning to wonder if we'll need it. The leg's so much stronger now." James covered her hand with his. "We're going, not just for the leg, but for all the possibilities Denver offers. Remember what we talked about?" She did remember. Their conversations had begun stretching beyond recovery and riding, into dreams of the future. James had connections in Denver. Horse breeders, cattle buyers, people who could benefit from Sarah's knowledge of bloodlines and grazing patterns. They'd talked of combining their expertise, of building something together that was more than either of them had imagined alone. "I remember," she said softly. "It's just, everything's changing so fast. Good changes." Sarah looked at their joined hands, at the journal documenting their shared journey, at the way the morning light made James's eyes crinkle at the corners when he smiled. "The best kind," she admitted. "Scary, but good." A knock at the door preceded Tom's entrance. He'd stopped waiting for formal permission weeks ago, becoming more family than employee. "Mail from town," he announced, then grinned at their clasped hands on the table. "Though I can see you're busy with more important matters." "Tom." James's warning held no real heat. They all knew the ranch hands had been quietly supportive of the relationship developing between their boss and the remarkable Miss Henderson, as they'd taken to calling her. "Just saying what everyone can see," Tom replied cheerfully. "Oh, and Mrs. Wilson at the general store asked me to remind you about the spring social next week. Says it's time Miss Henderson made an appearance in town, show folks how well she's doing." Sarah tensed slightly, but James's hand remained steady on hers. "What do you think?" he asked, ready to scandal the good people of town properly. She thought of the journal entries, of each small victory recorded in its pages, of the strength she'd built, not just in body, but in spirit, of the man beside her who had helped her find that strength without ever making her feel weak. Yes, she decided. Let's give them something worth talking about. Tom's grin widened. I'll tell Mrs. Wilson you'll both be there. After he left, Sarah added a new entry to the journal. Planning to attend spring social. First public outing. Together, ready for new challenges. James read it and smiled. Think we should warn them? About what? That they're about to meet the new Sarah Henderson, the one who rides again, who's building a future on her own terms, who doesn't care what anyone thinks about who she chooses to dance with. Sarah laughed, the sound as free as her heart felt. Let them discover it themselves. Sometimes the best changes come as a surprise. The property deed lay on the table between them, its edges worn and yellowed with age. Sarah stared at her father's familiar signature, her fingers tracing the boundaries drawn in faded ink. After all these months of progress, of hope, this single document threatened everything. It has to be a mistake, James said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Your father filed the proper paperwork. I remember him doing it. Apparently not. Sarah's voice was hollow. According to Mr. Jenkins, the county never received the final registration. Without it, my claim to the property is contested. The letter from the bank had arrived that morning, carried by a concerned Tom who'd heard rumors in town. The Wilcox Mining Company had discovered silver traces in the northern hills and was challenging every uncertain land claim in the area. They can't just take your land, James insisted. You've worked it for years. Your father before you. They can and they will, unless we find that registration. Sarah's hand went to her cane, gripping it like an anchor. I've searched everywhere. If Pa filed it, he never kept a copy. James paced the cabin, radiating frustrated energy. There has to be a way. County records, territorial offices. He stopped suddenly. The spring social. Jenkins will be there. Let me talk to him. And say what? Sarah's laugh held no humor. That he should ignore the law because I'm a crippled woman who can't work the land properly anyway. Sarah. James knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Look at me. You are not losing this land. I won't let it happen. She met his gaze, seeing the determination there. You can't fix everything, James. Watch me. His grip tightened. I have connections in the territorial office. Resources we can use. And more importantly, I have you, the most stubborn, capable woman I know, who's never backed down from a fight that matters. Sarah looked around the cabin, at the saddle they'd crafted together, the journal recording her triumph. Over injury, the life she'd rebuilt with his help. The thought of losing it all made her chest tight with fear. Trust me, James said softly, like you trusted me with the saddle. We'll fight this together. She drew a shaky breath, straightening her spine. Together, she agreed, and saw the pride bloom in his eyes at her resilience. The deed still lay between them, a challenge to everything they'd built. But as James helped her to her feet, his hand steady and sure, Sarah felt the fear begin to transform into determination. They had overcome so much already. This was just one more mountain to climb, one more barrier to break. And this time, she wasn't facing it alone. The partnership agreement spread across Sarah's kitchen table, its fresh ink gleaming in the lamplight. James's lawyer had drawn it up with remarkable speed, creating a document that was both legally sound and elegantly simple. A formal business partnership between Sarah Henderson and James Blackwood, combining their lands and resources into a single operation. It's more than just a legal shield, James explained, watching Sarah read the terms. It's a statement. The Wilcox Mining Company can't claim you're unable to work the land when you're officially partnered with one of the territory's largest ranching operations. Sarah traced the signature lines at the bottom, her heart thundering. This is a big step, James. Yes. He moved closer, his hand warm on her shoulder. But we were heading here anyway, weren't we? This just speeds up the timeline a bit. The spring social had proved pivotal. James had indeed spoken with Jenkins, but it was Sarah who had turned the tide. She'd walked into that gathering on James's arm, head high, and demonstrated to everyone present that she was far from helpless. She'd danced, carefully but with dignity, and spoken knowledgeably about cattle breeding with the territory's most respected ranchers. "Did you see Jenkins's face?" she said now, smiling at the memory, "when I explained my plans for improving the valley grazing patterns? I saw everyone's faces." James's voice held pride. "They'd written you off as a charity case. You showed them a businesswoman instead." Sarah picked up the pen, studying its sharp nib. The partnership agreement would change everything, legally, socially, personally. Yet somehow it felt like simply acknowledging what had already grown between them, as natural as spring following winter. "No more rumors about your intentions," she said, half teasing. "They'll have to find something else to gossip about." "Let them gossip," James squeezed her shoulder. "We know what we're building here." Sarah dipped the pen in ink and signed her name with a steady hand. James added his signature beside hers, and just like that, their futures were legally entwined. "Partners," she said softly, watching the ink dry. "In everything," he agreed, and when he kissed her, it felt like sealing a promise far deeper than any legal document could express. The lamp flickered, casting their shadows on the cabin wall. Two shapes merged into one, while outside the first stars of evening blazed against the darkening sky, bearing witness to what love and determination could build from adversity's ashes. The charcoal sketch captured the dawn, breaking over their combined properties, Sarah's valley merging seamlessly into James's ranchlands, the mountains rising proud and ancient behind them. James had drawn it as they sat together on her porch. That morning, his artist's eye capturing not just the landscape, but the promise it held. "Here," he said, pointing to where the valleys met, "is where we'll run the spring calves. Your grazing patterns combined with my breeding stock will have the strongest herd in the territory within 2 years." Sarah leaned against his shoulder, studying the drawing. The morning sun matched the scene in the sketch, painting the world in shades of gold and possibility. Dawn, her faithful mare, grazed contentedly nearby, the specialized saddle catching the early light. "And here," she added, touching the paper where the creek curved through the property, "we can build the water system you designed. My father always said these valleys could support twice the cattle if we could just manage the water properly. Your father was a wise man." James added a few subtle shading marks to the mountains. "He'd be proud of how you've handled everything." "He'd like you," Sarah said softly, "not just for helping me, but for seeing me as I am, for understanding that I needed to find my own way back." Their first long ride together had proven her words. They'd covered most of their combined property. Sarah secure in her custom saddle, James matching his pace to hers without making it obvious. She'd shown him hidden springs he'd never known existed, while he'd pointed out improvements they could make together. "Speaking of finding your way," James set the sketch aside, turning to face her. "The doctor in Denver sent another letter. Says he's eager to try those new treatments we discussed." Sarah nodded, no longer afraid of such discussions. "After the spring calving," she said. "We'll go then. I want to see how our combined herds do first." "Our herds," James repeated, smiling. "I like the sound of that. Better get used to it." Sarah returned his smile. "The partnership agreement makes it official. What's mine is yours, what's yours is mine. Including the challenges, especially those." She gripped his hand. "We're stronger together, James. These past months have proven that." The sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of morning mist. In the distance, they could hear Tom and the other hands beginning their day's work, their voices carrying clearly in the crisp air. "Ready to start our first full day as partners?" James asked, gathering up the sketch. Sarah stood, reaching for her cane but not really needing it. "Lead the way, Mr. Blackwood." "Always Mrs. Blackwood to be," he replied softly, and together they walked toward their shared horizon. The ring box was worn velvet, a family heirloom like the treasure it contained. James held it out as they sat together on her porch, the same, spot where months ago he'd first spotted smoke rising from her chimney. "It was my grandmother's," he said softly. "She was a pioneer too. Helped build our first ranch from nothing but grit and hope. Reminded me of you from the moment we met." Sarah looked at the box, then at the man holding it. The morning sun caught the silver in his hair, the laugh lines around his eyes that had deepened with their shared joys over these past months. "You're sure?" she asked, though they both knew this moment had been building since that first day. A crippled rancher woman with a stubborn streak wider than the territory? "I'm sure." James's voice held the same steady certainty that had helped her rebuild her life. "You're not crippled, Sarah. You're the strongest person I know. And that stubborn streak," he smiled, "that's what made me fall in love with you." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band set with a single diamond that caught the light like a captured star. "I'm not asking to rescue you. You've proven you don't need rescuing. I'm asking to build something together, something bigger than either of us could create alone." Sarah touched the ring gently, feeling the smooth gold worn by generations of strong women. She thought of their partnership agreement, their shared plans, the way they'd learned to work together while respecting each other's independence. "Yes," she said simply, and watched joy bloom in James's eyes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her close for a kiss that tasted of morning coffee and future promises. When they parted, Sarah rested her forehead against his. "Partner," she whispered. "In everything," he replied, their private vow more binding than any ceremony could be. Above them, dawn painted the sky in colors of hope, while in the distance their combined herds grazed peacefully, two families becoming one, just like their hearts. The new brand design combined both their legacies, the Blackwood B, intertwined, with the Henderson H in an elegant figure that spoke of partnership and pride. Sarah traced it on the fresh leather of her saddle as she rode beside James, their horses moving in perfect rhythm across the spring-green valley. Her leg barely troubled her now, thanks to the Denver doctor's treatments and their carefully crafted saddle. But the real healing had come from this man beside her, who had seen her strength when she'd forgotten it existed. "Ready to check the north pasture, Mrs. Blackwood?" James asked, his smile as warm as the morning sun. Sarah straightened in her saddle, feeling the solid support beneath her, the strength within her, and the love beside her. "Lead on, partner. We've got work to do."